If you like the video, make sure to like, subscribe, and comment. For more videos like this, people who spend a lot of time in deep woods, cryptid trails, etc. What is the scariest thing you have seen out there? I was camping with my Boy Scout troop in Alpine, New Jersey when I was in early 8th grade, November of 2010, I stepped out of the cabin in the middle of the night to take a piss and went out and did my business. I stood outside for a second, taking in the campsite. I was standing by a picnic table and glanced around. The moon was so bright that it made the sky look dark blue rather than black, and there was a light fog ominously cascading along the campsite. I heard a rustling in some bushes and didn't think much of it at first. But it continued and got louder. Slowly, I moved my flashlight along until I got to the source of the noise as it got louder and louder. I looked over and saw something that I still don't quite understand, to be honest. This thing was gigantic. Standing on hind legs, he was tall and had a muscular body with fur that looked to be black/dark gray. He had the head of a dog/wolf, only thicker. And the weirdest part? Yellow eyes. I stared at him, and he stared at me. And then he just vanished. Ran away faster than I could even blink. I was so bewildered that I blacked out for a minute and had to sit down, but I went back to the cabin and tried to go back to sleep. I managed to block it out of my mind for a while. Repressed memories is the term, I believe, but it eventually resurfaced when I watched an episode of Monster Quest about werewolves. This doesn't really bother me anymore, truthfully. I actually think it was pretty damn cool, almost like the setting for a perfect horror movie lol. The funny thing is, I feel like this thing didn't want to see me any more than I wanted to see him. It's as if we looked at each other and just silently agreed to say nothing, leave each other alone and act like all this shit never happened. I personally don't buy into all that transformation, bark at the moon BS. I think werewolves are more of an undiscovered species. I stayed with the troop for a while after making Eagle to help mentor some younger scouts, and while I'll always be known as the fun leader, probably due to being closer in age, I still always stress to them that the buddy system is mandatory at all times. Because my night could have been much different if this wolf creature I saw was a little more on the confrontational side. Cue the creepy organ music, lightning crackling, evil laugh and wolves howling. Backpacking in the Yukon. We met this dude named Carl in Dawson at a free dinner put on by the town church. He asked my friend and I, both girls, where we were staying. We said we were backcountry camping to play it safe, and then he went on to say he knew the whole area like the back of his hand. He asked for specifics. We lied and said we were at the main campsite. We finished our dinner and tried to run out of there, but then he cornered us and offered to give us a ride back to our campsite. Luckily we had a car, so we said no thanks and tried to make a run for it. We got to our car and started driving down the road to where we were camping. It's the Yukon, there's only a few people driving back and forth, and we took a turn onto a gravel road heading north. We realized there's been a truck following us since we left town, and we especially noticed once we're on this gravel road with absolutely no service and no emergency services. There are literally no turnoffs on this road. Even if there was, we were in prime bear territory next to a river, so running for it wasn't even worth it. My friend decided she was just going to drive faster and try to pull a fast one on Carl. So we blitzed down the gravel road, until we hit snow. The whole road is covered in snow and ice and we can't go much further in the pace that she set. We see a campsite ahead of us, blitz it there, and park the car on the far side of the road to hopefully confuse the guy. We grab our tents, sleeping bags, food, and everything warm within our vicinity and make a run for it. We saw that the campsite had a shelter in the middle. We knew we had to get warm quickly, so the game plan was run to the shelter, get fully dressed, and prepare to sleep in a snow embankment. However, once we got to the shelter we bumped into a family of 12 people, 8 men and 4 women. We ran into the shelter swearing, cursing, and freaking out because we felt that creepy Carl was after us, so once we turned around and saw the faces staring at us in amazement we calmed down and tried to explain our situation. From the moment we uttered the words "there's a man who's been following us for the last 100 kilometers, everyone stepped up. The men ran outside with their knives, hiking poles, bear spray, etc., and the women took us and told us to run. They had seen a dense patch of trees in the northeast corner of the campsite, and knew that all of us could hide within the trees without fear of being found. They even mentioned we could build quinzees super quickly to hide in, but running further away felt safer. As we ran to safety, we could hear the men yelling and telling creepy Carl to stay away. There were loud noises, a car alarm, we knew it was our car, and then complete silence. My friend and I stared at each other with tears in our eyes. We were in the northern part of the Yukon, in the snow, in -10°C weather, and we had just been followed from what we thought was just going to be a free dinner from the local church. After 30 minutes, the other women decided it was time to return to the shelter and to find the men. We returned and found the men safe and sound. Apparently Creepy Carl had told them that we were none of their business, and that we had wronged him in some sort of manner, so he broke our car window and then turned around and left. One of the guys had a car, so he had followed Creepy Carl down the road a good 15 to 20 kilometers before turning back around. The women invited my friend and I to sleep on their campsite, and we gladly obliged. We woke up the next morning safe and sound in the middle of the Yukon without cell or emergency services, and a giant appreciation for finding other humans. In the Cairngorms 2 weeks ago, the wind was reported over 100 kilometers per hour. We were in our tent for 17:30. At about 1900 hours I heard a calm female voice say hello. "Hello, are you okay?" I nudged the guys, asked them if they heard it. They say it's the wind. We all hear an engine in the distance, we all heard it. We were at Loch Etchockan, which is very remote, no roads, only accessible by foot. The snow was very deep that day and it was close to a whiteout. We look around but find nothing, no tracks, etc., but whatever it was, we heard it through the howling wind, so it had to be close. We weren't too creeped out, but we are still confused. Every year I go out to the Rockies to go climbing and hiking. To minimize the weight of my backpack I use a hammock instead of a traditional tent. Plus sometimes it's easier to find 2 trees than flat ground. I definitely feel more exposed, but that was never an issue, until now. I'm taking a nap in the afternoon and in my sleep haze I hear something rustling around. I figure it's one of my friends getting ready, so I roll over to see what the plan is. But instead of one of my buddies I have a brown bear not more than 2 feet away staring straight at me. I can't even remember how I felt in that instant. I just reacted and hollered and clapped my hands and it quickly left. Needless to say I was wide awake after that. Just to have something that potentially dangerous creep up on you when you are asleep is freaking terrifying. And I had 2 more weeks of the trip to go sleeping in that hammock. I was out exploring in the woods in upstate NY. I was crossing a junior gorge and there was this really pretty 20-foot waterfall, so I climbed up around it. At the top the water ran flat for a dozen yards or so, and then it bent and was a gorge again. The first thing I saw was the altar in the middle of the stream. It was about 3 by 5 feet, and about 4 feet high, made out of flat stones. In amongst the stones were scattered bottles of liquor, not all empty. Also some knives, of course. On one side of the stream was a cliff, on the other was a small bank and then a cliff. I must have spent 5 minutes scanning my surroundings as quietly as possible before investigating more. On the bank there were seats and stout walls made out of flat stones. Scattered around were things like shirts, cloth, a machete, and the occasional saw. And rope. When I was on the bank, I realized that where the stream bent, it was about 5 feet below the level of the bank, so someone could easily be there. Or just around the bend in the gorge, I had no way of knowing. So I scurried back down the waterfall and ran home, right? No, because I'm the type of person who would die in a horror movie. I'd been making no noise, so I crept up to the bend in the stream where the bank dropped off. It was a ring-wraith hobbit situation, except I was the one crapping my pants. I was now able to peek up the gorge, so I did for a while to make sure no one was there. I slowly leaned over the edge of the bank, and then suddenly jumped down to the edge of the stream because I couldn't handle the suspense I had created for myself. No one was there, but it was a great place to hide. So I slowly made my way up the gorge, stopping every now and then to scan the ridges and look behind me. I've been back around that area about a dozen times, but I've only found that place a few times. I haven't gone back into the gorge I found it in though. Wandering around some really rugged parts near the Seven Devils, ID, completely off trail. When I say steep, I mean really steep hills and some cliffs. After walking uphill for a couple hours, I stopped to look at a massive curl leaf mountain mahogany and looked over to finally see a little patch of flattish ground. In the middle, there was a very well built cairn that is about 5 feet in diameter at the base, and about 6 feet tall. Very symmetrical, and you could tell it had been there a very long time due to the amount of lichen that was on the rocks. On closer inspection, the rocks were all basalt, which was odd, because that wasn't normal for the area. They were all roughly the same size, as well. As I was looking around to look for any evidence of any other basalt rocks, I noticed that the ground, even though it was covered with grass, all had rocks with a specific white patina that was common on chunks of the surrounding rocks. The ground looked like it had been paved with the patina of the rocks faced up. Not really creepy, I guess, but there was no reason for it to be there. Literally 15-mile radius to any pavement, and at least 4 to the nearest road. About 2 miles off trail, straight up the side of the hill. Since I couldn't figure out why it was there, I decided I probably shouldn't be, either. The weirdest thing I've had happen was a full-blown cryptid encounter out in the Joshua Tree, California area. I'll preface this post by explaining a bit about myself. I've always been a night owl, and my current profession actually entails being up all night so the dark doesn't bug me, and I have pretty excellent night vision. I don't panic. I'm a medical professional and a bit of an outdoorsman. I'm a big dude, 6'2", 260, and a biology nerd. I've posted about the first encounter in a few Ask Reddit threads, but never about the second. The first encounter I had was on October 22, 2005 on a stretch of back road in the Mojave Desert in the vicinity of Joshua Tree in Yucca Valley, California. It was the third or so day of quail season, and I was all tagged up and ready to go hunting. I had a little Jack Russell Terrier named Gus that a friend let me borrow for the day since I can't own dogs or cats, allergic as all hell. I drove out and parked my Jeep on a turnout at a dirt road intersection. There are a zillion dirt roads out there, and some of the bigger ones actually have stop signs at the intersections. It was a good day, and getting a little late, but I hadn't hit my bag limit yet. I decided that I would stay out a bit past sundown to try and bag the last few birds on my permit. I was dressed pretty warmly, and Gus didn't seem to mind, so away we went. By the time I hit my bag limit, the sun had been over the horizon for about an hour. Getting back to the road was easy enough, and following it back to the Jeep was as well. Around the time full twilight set and I came to an intersection with stop signs in both directions, and was getting my bearings when Gus froze mid-trot and immediately starting growling with his hackles up. He was a pretty chill dog, so watching him go from happy little derp to DEFCON 1 so fast was alarming on its own. I scanned the area to see what he might be upset about, because my first guess was javelina, wild pigs, and all I had was a shotgun loaded with bird rounds. As I said, these were dirt roads. Each road is roughly the same width as an average 2-lane city street. On the corner opposite the one we were on, I spotted a creature moving with the same general gait as a rooster, but without bobbing its head. What clued me in initially that it wasn't a chicken was the simple fact that from head to foot it must have been close to 3 feet tall. Based on body mass, I'd estimate that it weighed about 40 to 50 pounds. I tied Gus' leash to my belt so he wouldn't bolt after it and waited for it to wander off. It loitered on the corner for a minute, then without making so much as a flutter, it made a roughly 9-foot standing leap from the ground to perch atop the stop sign. Definitely not a chicken. At this point I decided it was prudent to be armed, so I popped 2 fresh shells in my shotgun and held it at the ready. When I looked back up, I saw its eyes. The 2 things that immediately sprang to mind: this is where the biology geek comes in, were that 1, they were forward-facing, meaning this animal was likely predatory, and 2, they were proportionally enormous, meaning it was likely fully nocturnal. I realized that a 3-foot-tall, predatory, nocturnal, 40-pounds animal that can make a 9-foot standing leap was now regarding me from a high perch, albeit from roughly 40 feet away, and that I was in a bad position. I leveled my shotgun and unloaded both barrels at it. After the echoes died down, it was still perched at the top of the stop sign, but making odd chirrup noises that sounded a lot like sneezing. I was reloading when it jumped down from the stop sign and ran away from us through the brush on the adjacent corner. I finished reloading, waited until Gus calmed down and jogged back to the Jeep. On the way back through I hit my trail lights at the intersection this had happened at and saw that the stop sign had definitely been peppered well with shot, and that the majority of it had been centered on the animal. This animal had taken a 9-foot standing leap soundlessly, perched perfectly on a 2 inches square area and taken 2 12-gauge loads of bird shot center mass, and sneezed at me. On the way out of town I told the story to the Spanish-speaking clerk at a local gas station, who laughed and told his coworker, "You hear that? This Garo just ran into El Chupacabra." Abandoned town in Alberta, there's a pretty popular cliff diving spot not too far, but this was during the night when it was pitch black. No other cars near the fence where you start the walk towards the town. We were breaking into one of the old boarded up houses and I heard voices behind me, and I turned around quickly and swear I saw 2 shadows walking by maybe 20 feet away. "Just silhouettes," I called out, and there was no response. There's really only one easy way to get to this place, and we were the only vehicle there. It's like a 15 minutes walk back to the fence, so that was spooky. A friend and I were hitchhiking around the south of France and camping anywhere we could find a spot to put out little tent. For a while, she would be really uneasy and be unable to sleep, as I think the sounds of cars and civilization in the distance made her worry that someone might see us. I knew that they were way further away than they sounded to us at night, and was unfazed by it all. Usually she'd sleep badly and be shocked and slightly irritated by the fact that I could just switch off and go to sleep. One night, we were struggling to find somewhere to camp before sunset. We had ended up really in the middle of nowhere. We came to what looked like some dense woods with possibly a bit of a clearing further in, and decided to take our chances. I had to fight and hack through a lot of ferns that were taller than me to get to this clearing, and honestly started to regret it. with this sudden feeling hitting me that we should turn back. I actually stopped what I was doing, stopped moving and looked at her ready to say no, let's go back. But she was looking at me to keep going and I felt like I had to provide us somewhere to sleep. I think she was used to me unfalteringly doing whatever had to be done. I had no real reason as to why I didn't want to continue, and at this point we didn't really have another choice, to be honest. We got to this clearing. It was actually kind of swampy, wet and very uncomfortable, but it had to do. I felt so uneasy. I lit a load of candles outside our tent, rare for me, but I really wanted more light, and drank some beers to try and feel better. We both started getting really grumpy with each other and had an argument. I've never seen her so mad at me before. It wasn't like she could just walk out into the woods away from me to cool off though, so she laid next to me in the tent bitching about me into her diary. Since then she laughs about how unreasonably angry she was that night and how she was writing such angry stuff about me. We eventually laid down to sleep. I couldn't. There was this weird sound. I didn't mention it for a while because I didn't want to scare her, but eventually asked if she heard anything. She said she didn't, and I didn't elaborate or push it. It was like unintelligible whispering all around us. Everywhere. And it sounded like something was moving around directly underneath my head, not like leaves rustling, but like everything moving. Creaking and tapping and rustling, but not like leaves rustling. And I couldn't feel anything moving, but I figured that for something to be moving enough for it to be that loud, I surely would have felt it. I kept piling clothes beneath my head to block it out, as I though it was probably some insects under the tent, but the sound didn't sound any less loud or clear. I barely slept at all that night. The sounds wouldn't go and I felt sick with anxiety. The next morning I made us pack up and get out in a hurry. I didn't really talk to her about it because I didn't want to scare her or make her worry, and I was just glad she'd managed to sleep for once. But that was one of the biggest feelings I'd had in a long time. That whole place felt wrong. There were a load of ants on the ground under our tent, so I wonder if we'd been on a nest. But the sounds were very specific and all around us. To cap it all off, we were idiots for sleeping somewhere so swampy and left very maybe mosquito bitten. In hindsight, a lot of the decisions we made on that trip were idiotic, but whatever. Few years ago me and my dad were camping by Lillooet, British Columbia, Canada. We were a few hours off the main roads and up in the mountains, and we found a great place to set up for the night. I set up the tent and my dad slept in the back of his Land Rover Defender with the dog. He went to bed pretty early and I stayed up that night just wanting to take in the endless night. I was 2 months from joining the army, so I was wanting to stay up late. That night it got very cold for August, around 2°C, and I finally packed it in around 1 a.m., kicked the fire out and rolled into my tent. Just as I was about to fall asleep on the cusp of dozing off, I heard from down the nearby river valley what sounded like a scream. My eyes shot open, and my entire body was still, listening intently for what it was. It sounded like it was about 100 meters away. After what seemed like ages, I finally moved a bit to get comfortable and looked at my watch, 1:20 a.m. I contemplated that it was just my imagination, but then I heard it again, louder and more clear. This time it sounded more demonic, but with blood-curdling screams. I was really frightened at this point and really wished my dog was in the tent with me. My mind was racing. We are a good 2 hours from the nearest town, no nearby farms or homes in this area. Should I go see what's going on? Is it someone being killed? Am I going to get killed if I say what's going on? The screams kept going though. Over the course of an hour they got weaker and quieter. Until the final plea for help, a long drawn-out gasp for life. You could hear the blood mixed into the lungs when it tried to gasp. I lay there, in my sleeping bag, terrified. And then I heard it. A wolf howl. And then another further away. What I had just heard was a few wolves killing a large hoofed animal. Probably an elk or large deer. I felt relief that it was only wolves and not demons in the valley. It turns out that the kill was even further than I thought. Combined with the stillness and bitter cold of the night, the sound must have bounced up the valley, because the morning of, I walked down and found the remains what seemed like 500 to 600 meters away from the camp. This isn't necessarily something scary, but definitely made me never want to go back. Growing up in a rural town, we didn't have too much to do. At the age of 14, most weekends I'd spend exploring the outsides of town with a friend of mine. The outsides of town were mostly all typical Australian bushland, with the exception of a few large untamed fields. One day a friend and I were following a river just down to the point of it being new territory for us. This was in noon, by the way, and the bush ahead seemed a lot more dense and darker than what we'd expect. We still kept walking, but just before getting to the opening to it we both simultaneously stopped in our tracks. I had a feeling come over me of being extremely uneasy and anxiety-ridden. We both looked at each other and knew we both felt the exact same thing. With little talk we turned around and headed back hurriedly. As stated, not necessarily scary. I did however find it really eerie how both of us, at the same time had the feeling something was off but couldn't pinpoint one thing. Almost as if we had stepped over a line of sorts. I have two that happened in the same area of woods. First, decided to take me dog out into a large tract of woods that I had a good amount of experience in to camp with me for the night. We made our way out to where I knew there were some sturdy frames, probably used for paintball some time ago, built into a couple trees, and continued to make a lean-to, build a fire, and eat dinner before a good old night in the dirt. As I was getting comfortable and preparing to sleep, I started hearing what sounded like the air rushing out of a bicycle pump, only much louder and continuously getting closer. My dog immediately stood alert, and it got so close that I eventually grabbed a stick that I had lit on fire like a torch in one hand, and stepped out of the shelter with her on her leash in my other. I began walking deliberately in the direction of whatever animal was making this noise, which I later assumed to be a fisher cat as our town used to be known for an extremely high population of, while yelling and waving my torch all while my dog growled. This seemed to not only fail to scare it away, but enticed it to advance on us quicker. I quickly put out the fire and noped out of there cause I didn't want to risk my dog fighting anything that had the balls to come at us like that. Thing followed us 3/4 of a mile on our way home, making that weird hissing noise and growling the whole time. Second, in the same woods, only much deeper in and by myself with no dog. Made myself a much larger shelter, fire, and nice bed of pine branches before I ate dinner and laid down to sleep. I had been certain that I could see eyes glowing in the distance, but got no warning noises, so figured it wasn't a fisher cat this time, and, like I said, I had a very large and secure shelter, so I just built my fire in front of the only entrance and laid down to sleep. I passed out for probably an hour or two until I woke up very quickly to the sound of something heavy with hooves pounding down a trail that ran right past where I was. I'm pretty sure it was 2 large deer, but what scared me was whatever the fuck they were running so hastily from. A minute after the shock of waking up to the hooves wears off, a whole fucking pack of coyote come barreling down the trail in the same direction going after the deer. Sounded like 1 or 2 stopped to investigate, but a huge yelling primate with a giant fire isn't something they usually want to be around for too long. Grew up on a ranch, seen my fair share of creepy things growing up in the mountains of Montana. I have a few stories that stand out. One I have trouble explaining. I was riding through deep timber trying to find a bull that had gone missing when my horse starts freaking out and refused to go any further. I noticed a clearing where some sunlight broke through the trees a little ways away, so I tied my horse to a tree and decided to take a look. Well, when I got into the clearing I found our bull, only he was about 20 feet off the ground, jammed into a huge pile of timber. Now this is bear country and bears will cache kills to come back to later, but whatever did this was unnaturally huge, as this was old growth trees about 24 inches in diameter. The clearing was made from these trees being snapped off at ground level. I was just kind of in shock when my dog started growling, and I noped the fuck out of there as fast as I could. Was once fishing with a friend, a lake in the middle of nowhere and not a soul around. We had parked a few miles away and had to walk through dense woods with our gear to get there. About a 30 minutes walk with the gear. To paint a picture, once you get to the lake the trees open up so you can see the lake around you but no further through the trees. And you lose cell phone service during the car ride about a half an hour away. A very secluded feeling. We had been there all day, a good 6 hours of daylight, and nobody else came. It started to get dark around 7:30 p.m. so we made a little fire in a pit. Around 10 p.m. we put the fire out. It was pitch black outside. My friend had just recast his rods after I'd done mine so we could settle in for the night. We stay up till around 1 a.m. just cracking jokes and eating food. Only the sounds of nature, birds, owls and whatnot, and the wind, surrounding us. After we turned the tent light off about 1 a.m. we heard zipping noises coming from outside, as if someone was opening a ziplock. Just 2, my friend nudged me and grabbed a small bat, looked outside, said nothing was there. 10 minutes go by and we are confused over this noise, then we heard a splash. We both jumped up and ran outside, but there was nothing visible in the water, was dark, and no lights or people around from what we could see. We both get into the tent. By this time I'm shitting myself clutching onto a bat. We have no option but to stay. The car is too far away and the woods are too dense to walk through during the night, especially if something is out there. Whilst we're inside, a really deep male voice sighed next to the tent, "You know you're not supposed to be here." My friend said, "Who's that?" No response. We get up to look, nobody there. No noises of someone walking away, no nothing. We turned the torches on and looked around, stuck in a single spot outside the door of the tent. Stood there for about 5 minutes just looking, making sure no one was there. There wasn't. We went back to bed but didn't sleep. We spoke very quietly for the next 6 hours. 6 a.m. came, the sun was out again. We got up to get the fuck out of there. When we went outside, there was blood on the trees and a single footprint in the fire pit we had made the night prior that belonged to none of us. Deep in a rural forested area of northern Wisconsin, I used to hike with my dog. Pack a sandwich and some water and take the rifle, and just go walking. Didn't use the rifle much, but it was part of the fun. Anyway, me and Hooch, the dog, spent one day delving much farther into the forest than we usually did. Things had gotten quite somber, lots of moss and a bit of a swampy area. But then we came through to a nice clearing that was basically in the center of this swampy moat. In the center of the clearing was a shanty town. It was a complex of cobbled structures made from basically shipping pallets and carpet samples. There were a handful of houses, and what I dubbed the community center was a larger multi-room structure with a kitchen and living room. It was a very eerie area, and anyone who spent time in the woods knows that creepy feeling of being watched when the forest goes drop dead silent. We poked around for a few quick moments, saw that they had rigged a car battery to power some lights. They had coffee grounds, a shitter area out back, some old magazines and a little makeshift library. Hooch started whining a bit, and I was already skeeved out, so I didn't need any more encouragement to GTFO. Decided to come back 2 weeks later with the camera. Whole thing was gone. Moved. No rubble or debris even. Shitter area covered up nice and tidy. That was 20 years ago. Any trace of the shanty town was gone within a year. Never figured out who it was or where they went, but it was remote enough in that area where it could have been anyone who didn't want to be part of civilization. I believe they saw me snooping around, but were deterred by the dog and gun, then relocated after being found out. Took my daughter camping in Colorado. Drove the four-wheel truck way back on a small dirt road looking for a spot to put up the tent. Found a nice spot about 2 miles in next to a creek and set up. My daughter went walking over a little ridge just a few yards away, then came back and said she found a cave. Went to investigate, and outside of what appeared to be an old mining tunnel we found some magazines, a torn apart backpack with a lot of stuff scattered around including some first aid stuff, cooking equipment, clothing etc. Then I noticed bear tracks that looked like maybe a smaller grizzly. Too big for a black bear, which I have seen before. I ventured into the tunnel about 20 yards with a flashlight and was stopped dead by the unmistakable smell of a rotten corpse of some kind. It all added up to, pack up now and get the hell out of here, which we did in about 5 minutes. It was a couple summers ago. Me and my mate found this new hiking trail a town over, so we decided to check it. We packed a bag with some snacks and a few beers and set out. The trail is running parallel with a ridge line that's about 200 yards above us. Pretty densely forested. We decided to scale the hill to the top off trail, to see if we could get a good view. We reach the top and find a nice ledge. Crack open the beers and put them away. Then I look over to our left and I notice something blue in the distance. Curious teenagers, we go decide to check it out. As we get closer, we noticed it was an abandoned camp. The blue was a large tarp made into a makeshift tent big enough for 2. There was food trash around and some other things. But what caught my attention was there were children's toys all around. Dolls, stuffed animals, even a little girl's bike. We assumed it was a homeless camp, but why the girl's toys? Well, we then noticed a strange rock pile. It's about 4 feet long and 2 feet wide. And maybe 2 feet tall. Stacked stones in a pyramid shape. It was neatly placed and deliberately stacked in that fashion. Someone took their time making this. I thought maybe they'd hidden something underneath. So I dismantled the pyramid to ground level. But then the stones continue beneath the surface in the same stacked fashion. As I'm pulling rocks out, it committed down about another foot. We were speculating what it could be in a buzz state. Maybe cash or something. Then I looked up and say the girl's bike again with the toys. I asked my mate what if it's the little girl's body. He went pale. I said I don't want to find out. We recovered the supposed grave and hiked back down. I still wonder if I kept digging if I would have found a missing little girl. My grandfather used to have a place in Maine, about 6 to 7 hours away from Boston, near Mount Katahdin. We, my dad, me and occasionally my grandfather, used to work on a homemade trail that would connect to a nearby state-run trail. Over several years, we made it around 5 miles into the woods when there was a medium-sized creek running along where we planned to continue. It was about 15 feet wide and about 2 to 3 feet deep in the deepest spot. This threw a wrench in the works, so we left it for another day when we could bring some wood and make a bridge. Coming back several days later, we smelled something god-awful. My grandfather made a remark of how it smelled a bit like rotting meat. Being a hunter, he knew it pretty well and had no idea how right he was. Upon reaching the creek, the smell was worse than ever. Looking up and across, the 3 of us froze. My dad whispered, Oh fuck me. On the other side of the creek, was a deer, hanging from a tree limb by its hind legs, tied there by a rope. Its guts were hanging partially out. And it looked like the bugs and crows had gotten to it. The next thing I noticed was the head, or rather lack thereof. We stood there for a few minutes, soaking it in before I threw up, dry heaving after a little bit. We hiked back to the house, and called the game wardens. They came by and my dad went with them. I stayed home this time. A few hours later, they came back and told us, "We'll look into the area and see if we can find anyone." As well as a warning to be careful. As far as I know, nothing ever came of this, although we never tried to expand the trail past it. Okay, I'll start out by saying I'm experienced in the outdoors. I'm a hunter, hiker, and camper. I don't usually spook too easily because I basically grew up with a gun in one hand, a fishing pole in the other, and maybe a magnesium fire starter hidden somewhere special, as well as a knife. I always have a knife. Now I have 3 stories for you about being hunted, 2 of which I consider explainable. Story 1. I hunt in MN in a town not far north of Mill Lacs Lake. One season I was fairly deep in the woods on a snowmobile trail. When I hunt I typically carry my .30-06 and my knife and pack. I feel fairly confident in the woods, but this season I had some concern. The deer population seemed lower on our property recently, and we knew there were wolves around because you can hear them howl at night and have found tracks, but they typically don't mess with people luckily. But as I was scanning for deer tracks in the dirt, I found a different set of tracks that stood out to me. Looked canine minus the nail marks and was a bit wider. The paw on it looked like a 150 pounds animal. Then it clicked that this was a feline track, a big one, and fairly fresh. I knew there were bobcats around, but they don't get that big, and next logical step is to assume that there's a cougar around. Now I decided to double back, so I'm heading back east on the trail and my dad calls and asks me to do a push through the woods towards his stand, so I say sure. At this point his stand is maybe 500 meters through thick woods from me, and I'm concerned about predators, but I also know that I'm 6 feet 4 inches and about 190 pounds before putting on my gear, and that statistically speaking cougars don't tend to attack healthy adult men, so I push forward. I get about halfway to the other stand and get concerned because I lost my marker, so I stop to regain my bearings. Then it hits me, my gut tells me you are being watched. Then I notice how still the woods are, very quiet. Then I hear a branch snap behind me by maybe 20 meters. I ready my rifle and scan in a circle and only see trees and brush. I wait and it's just quiet, so I push forward towards my dad's stand. I think the whole time I hear something not far behind me quietly keeping pace. Eventually I stopped hearing it and the woods went back to normal with the birds singing and whatnot. Then I stepped out onto a trail about 40 meters from my dad's stand. I suspect it was the cougar that made the tracks. My guess is he or she thought I would put up too much of a fight for prey, or it winded my dad and chose to back off, but I never did see it. But something definitely was following me. Second story. Okay, so this happened maybe 2 years ago. I decided to take my fiancée hiking after work one evening in a park with some nice bluffs to climb for a great view. Was hoping to see a pretty sunset. Now this isn't a particularly safe thing to do in this time of night, so I gave her my tactical knife and I carried my 40 calories pistol. So we arrive and park the car, and we start heading up a trail, about 100 meters in we spook and jump what I think was a deer. It hauled ass away from us so quickly that I only saw a flash of tan and maybe its flag, and honestly it scared us pretty good too. So now I'm on edge and we round a crest in a hill and I see a black mass to my left in peripheral vision. I unsnap the retention on my holster and turn to engage. I'm out of black dirt. Now I calm down and we continue on, and it's a nice evening. Birds chirping still, bugs making noise, regular forest stuff. Now for the creepy. We get within about 200 meters of the halfway point on the trail and it starts to feel eerie, like we are being watched. This time it's clicked right away. The woods are now dead, but I start noticing movement keeping pace with us. So I keep us moving towards the top of the hill, the high ground which is the halfway point on the trail. We reach it and stop, and it stops, but the woods are still dead calm, and my fiancée tells me she thinks we are being followed. So we decide to move on and take a short cut back down the bluff to the paved trail. We make it and the woods get back to normal sounds again. We considered hiking more, but were a bit too spooked and left the park. Now whatever was following us I suspect was another cougar. It was quiet and we didn't see it, and the strangest part is that the stalking noises it did make sounded elevated, like it was moving from tree to tree, and big cats have been known to do this. Story 3, the least explainable of the 3. This one happened around June or July of 2007 I believe. I was around 17 years old and more cocky then, but still somewhat knowledgeable of the outdoors. My family used to own a cabin in NW, Wisconsin. I basically grew up there in the summer. I knew the woods well, but at night it was wise to stay in the cabin or at least by the bonfire by the beach, because of bears, wolves, and cougars. One of the creepiest things was if you were having a bonfire, The tree line was visible from the fire pit and beach, and at night you always felt like you were being watched from that tree line. But during the day the woods always seemed normal, not so creepy, that is until this incident. So this happened somewhere between 1200 to 1400. Me and my cousin were having an airsoft battle. I was in full woodland camo, he was not. I retreated onto the ATV trail into the woods for a tactical advantage, and our battle took us about 200 meters into about a third of the way up the trail. We had enough at this point and were standing at the edge of a clearing on the trail talking, and he was maybe 10 feet from me. When I decided to mess with him, I shushed him and said we're being watched. He froze, then I realized the woods were dead quiet, and I got spooked and started scanning the tree line and the other edge of the clearing from left to right when I saw it. Its teeth gave it away, it was panting and staring at my cousin. I don't expect you to believe me, but what I saw was a wolf as big as a black bear, at least 300 pounds, but it wasn't normal. This wolf was on two legs crouching next to a tree with its arm grasping the tree, grasping with a clawed hand. It had reddish-brown fur. I told my cousin that we have to go, and next thing I know he is sprinting, and I looked back at Wolfie, who had locked on and sprinted a few steps on 2 feet, and then I turned and ran when it looked like Wolfie was dropping to all fours. It charged us and sounded right on our asses barreling through the brush, but for whatever reason let us go when we broke out of the tree line and headed for the cabin. What stuck with me the most was the sheer size. Wolfie appeared to be nearly 7 tall when upright, and that where it should have had front paws it appeared to have large clawed hands. Now I'm not sure how to explain it away rationally. I have heard wolves will occasionally kind of walk upright, but as far as I know they can't sprint on 2 legs, nor do wolves get that big, and black bears more waddle on 2 legs. The closest description is silly, a werewolf or dogman. Went camping down near a beach in Florida. This is my story. After a long trip along the highways and the boredom that comes with it, we arrive at our Florida campsite, a little place that we rented, and set up shop. 2 tents and an overhang draped with a mosquito net to protect us from the swarms. We weren't even there an hour before I could feel the bite marks all along my legs in the oppressive Florida heat. Setting up shop takes quite a while, and apparently applying a makeshift air condition to my family's tent took longer than that, but we completed the whole thing and went exploring. Now, our campsite, as stated before, isn't a big one. It's a circle large enough to fit an RV and some tents. A wooden table, like those tables in the parks, was already there, most likely supplied by the folks who are responsible for the area. I don't know if they're National Park Service or not, probably. Towards the back end of our camp, there is a thick wall of Florida bush, so walking through it was difficult for anyone if they had to walk through it. Beyond our campsite stood a structure with a shower room and some bathrooms. It was an old building, nasty too. You had to wear sandals in order to keep your feet from getting warts, it was that nasty. Last thing, there were people who had set up shop next to us, and there were perhaps more people doing the same beyond those folks as well. Me and my family go off exploring. I remember it was late, the sky was orange, and we came across a pier that looked out towards a field of tall grass, and I mean tall grass. We hung around, watching all of it, talking about random stuff, and then we head back. For the rest of that night we stayed up and talked by the firelight, then we went to bed. The next day, I hop out the tent with the smell of coffee pervading the air. The morning had a bluish tint to it. It was around 7 a.m. or 8 a.m. and I was looking forward to shore fishing. Me, my dad, and my brother head out to the shop, grab some bait, and the rest of us, accompanied by my mom and my mom's side of the family, go down to the beach. For hours, and I mean hours, we shore fished, and we only shore fished. I caught a shark, a baby one, and held it while my brother laughed at me for being afraid to grab it. Our cousins, who were little at the time, went about the beach doing their own thing, and my mom and grandma relaxed under another overhang we brought with us. I shore fish for a while, take a break, and get back to it. The day that had began so quickly was now ending in the same manner, only there was a problem. I felt feverish. I felt that constant and consistent feeling of heat bite at my face, arms, and legs. I was sunburned head to toe. My mobility was painful, slow, and the shower I had to take didn't help my burning legs and swollen feet. My feet, for the record, looked like swollen hot dogs when you cook 'em, and they stayed like that for quite a while, even after the whole trip was done. Back at the campsite, all of us huddle under the overhang with the net around it because a soaking rain begins to pour all along the campsite. It's cold, my legs hurt, and I feel sick due to the constant burn of the pain in my legs, which was brought about by the wind that was blowing. The rain stops, I sit down in a chair, and for the rest of the evening, even way into the dark, we all sit around a crackling fire and chat away. It was a good time, despite the burn. Anyhow, we go to bed and I'm stiff as a log because of my condition, which eased a little in the passing hours. I go sleep on my back, sleep for some hours, and then I hear a blood-curdling scream reverberate into the night. I'm not kidding, it was a woman's scream that I heard and my heart was beating hard. I was a kid, probably 15, 14, and I thought The Walking Dead was happening. That was my biggest fear at the time. My mom's up, asking my dad about the noise. Apparently he didn't hear it, and then he gets up and goes to the bathroom, which is well beyond the wall of bushes behind our tent. I go to sleep and wake up the next morning. The pain is still there in my legs, face, and arms, but it eased even more so. My ability to walk wasn't hampered at all. Hours later, we're back home. Now, about the scream, apparently a drunk woman had stepped on a rat and that terrified her into a bloody scream. My dad said he could smell beer from their campsite, since it was next to ours, and he heard someone vomiting over in the bushes. Not creepy in origin, but being a kid, sunburned all over, that was a terrifying thing to hear. My dad, years later, told me that camping in Florida was a little worse than all the field exercises he's ever been on. My dad is a Marine veteran of 20 years. I was working in the middle of 40 acres of forest in the middle of nowhere, cutting firewood. No roads. No houses. No people for miles. Nothing but trees, bugs, woodland creatures and me. I stopped my chainsaw to take a break. In that first second of silence, I hear a ringtone go off in the forest. The ringtone is a remixed version of Lady Gaga's Poker Face. The ringtone stopped quickly, and abruptly, and then, nothing. No sound. No movement. I called out, "Hello? Hello? Lady Gaga, Poker Face?" Clearly someone was in the woods watching me, but would not made themselves known to me. I figured that I could freak the fuck out and run back to civilization, or I could just laugh it off. I take a quick evaluation of things. I have a chainsaw, and they have Lady Gaga. If it comes to a fight to the death, I like the odds. So I laughed. Belted out a few off-key lines to Poker Face. Yelled out a few salutations to my voyeur in the woods and went on with the business of cutting firewood. To this day, I'm 80% sure it was a person with a cell phone. The other 20% thinks that my forest is haunted by a teenage girl who died in 2009.